Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. This is Tom-Oliver Regenauer speaking, and I'm meeting on the 12th of February 2023 for the second meeting with Technocracy Inc. from the United States with Charmie Gilcrease and Justin Lazarra, and we'll follow up on the conversation that we had in January, approximately 4 weeks ago, where we recorded the first installation of that conversation. And just because we didn't get to all the points we wanted to address, we said we are going to meet for a second time. So this is it, and welcome to today's episode and conversation. And to kick off, I wanted to ask a question that I forgot last time, which was my initial question that I wanted to ask, and that's how you both got involved with technocracy. How did you get in touch with the concept, like from a personal point of view? Other people join parties, or they create a band, or I don't know, they go to the World Wildlife Fund. People do different things. So how did you get involved personally, or how did you get attracted to the concept? Maybe you can quickly elaborate on that and just give people an idea on what inspired you about the idea.
Sure. For me, I answered an ad for, they needed a bookkeeper. So I was just answered that, got the job. And then the CEO or the executive director at the time was George Wright. And he kept talking and showing me information about technocracy. And the first couple things, I had the same reaction many people do. Oh, this is communism. This is socialism. You know, it was very off-putting to me at first. But then the more research I did and I listening to people and just really digging into the actual stuff, not what was advertised, was very interesting, and I thought was a really good concept.
So it was kind of by accident.
By accident, absolutely.
Interesting. And you, Justin?
Music. If you ever heard the band Typo Negative, they
Type
have
O Negative. Yes, actually, I came across the name. I couldn't associate an album, but I do know the name. I heard it.
yeah, they have an album, October Rust, and one of the tracks says something about technocracy. So I read that and I was like, "What's that?" I looked it up in the dictionary, and then
Okay.
I just started researching the word more and more after that, and found it in comic books and other stuff, and then eventually got led to the organization through doing research. But it all started with a Typo Negative band, and if you know their music, it's pretty funny that that's the association.
Yeah, anyway, it's pretty funny that you came across terminology in some song and then ended up joining the organization later on. That's a funny way to get there.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Thank you. Okay, and then what we also touched on last time to get into the topics is the history. So last time, and for people that haven't seen the first episode, I do recommend watching that video first before you watch that video right now, and basically get the first installation and the information we discussed. But we didn't touch on the details of the history as far as technocracy being a spread from the US to other countries. And that's what I did some research on in the past. So we talked about how it started with the Technical Alliance in 1917 and how it got to be Technocracy Inc. in the 30s, and how Howard Scott developed, the concepts, and basically that foundational history I think we touched on. But what I wanted to get into is the spread to China, because obviously for me, doing my research, as far as all the information I found, it looks as if, as I wrote in my article, rich people from the US found that an interesting concept that they would like to, to have a dummy like environment for. Like in IT, you say it's a sandbox to develop things and try it out and then see how it works. And if I look into the details and I see Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger and those guys going to China in the 70s, working with Mao Zedong, basically, and having that China opening to the market phase, they brought a lot of contacts, industry contacts, and even at the time it was illegal to do trade with China, but still they kept on funding. There's a lot of newspaper articles from the US. I think Washington Post or New York Times wrote about the the fact that technology transfers and know-how transfers happened even during a time when it was not actually allowed to do that. So my key question, and I wanted to understand what your position is. For me, it's kind of, I'm convinced that people like Rockefeller, who founded a lot of the philanthropic stuff at the time, and who was very closely involved with obviously a lot of the administrational people in the US and the Council on Foreign Relations and all these NGOs, you know, like influencing policy, especially foreign policy. It's my feeling and my hypothesis that they actually took the concept and tried to sell it to China when they went there. So you saw Kissinger being very like close with Mao, and even later on, speaking of Brzezinski and those guys, kept on meeting Mao. So do you think that's it's a right or is that a correct thesis that I have, or do you have a different view on how technocracy, that you confirmed China is a technocracy, how it got there and how it got installed there? So maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit.
Wir bei Manova möchten mit unabhängigem Journalismus die Spaltung überwinden. Und wir freuen uns sehr, wenn Sie uns dabei unterstützen mit einer kleinen oder gern auch größeren Spende. Vielen Dank.
I'm going to just say one thing real quick. It's the same thing I wrote to you in my response, is that people can take an idea and then twist it around and use it for their own purposes. And what's happening that I see in China and stuff is not the theory, theory that technocracy itself put up. It's been rearranged, and that's so I'll put that. Justin, you can.
No, that's fine. I mean, you made the point last time. You know, I'm not saying that this is the idea that Howard Scott had, or that the Chinese model is the initial thing that technocracy was about, the initial concept. Nevertheless, there is a technocracy obviously going on in China, even if they perverted it to some extent, or to a lot of to a big extent. But I just wanted to understand if you have the same feeling of how it got there. You know, that basically the upper echelons of U.S. industry at the time and politics sold it to Mao and the guys and installed something like a sandbox there.
I don't think that's what happened. I think they probably were introduced to the idea on their own through their own education, and then they made a choice of preferring to promote engineers and scientists on their own. When you have like a big council of people and they're not elected, then what basis are they competing on? So then you're competing based on education and accomplishment. And I think in communist China, education became a natural way of competing with other people within the party, because you're not competing for votes. You're competing based on accomplishment and education. So then it's logical that people would specialize in engineering and science to look more prestigious and respectable and intelligent than maybe your competitor who specialized in, you know, business or humanities or something else. You look like a better organizer, a better leader, a better technician to lead the state. And I think it was more of a product of their politics, their internal politics, than it was somebody from the West going over there and saying, hey, this is this great thing called technocracy. It works so good. I don't think that's how it happened. I think it was more of just a byproduct of the system. If you look at the evolution of South Korea post-World War II, South Korea was primarily led and managed by engineers. One of the original leaders for South Korea was an engineer, and he made a preference of only hiring and promoting engineers in leadership positions beneath him. And I think you got a similar thing in China, where it wasn't intentional. It was just what happened, because it's just a different mindset. In the West, we're very focused on democracy, and it's a bit of a popularity contest, you know. And you can really see that when you have certain candidates that get people really energized, and then they want to go out and do stuff for them, right? We're in like a place like communist China, you know, a lot of the bravado is forced and staged, and people don't get worked up and excited about stuff as much. I'm sure there are some people that do, but not to the degree you find in democratic countries, where people feel like their voice has a more direct influence on events.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think there was a direct like, hey, why don't you try this out? I don't think there was that kind of direct relationship. Now, another thing though is most of those engineers and scientists were educated in the West. You know, they got shipped over to the US and Europe for school and got introduced to Western ideas, and then took those back to their country, and then they ran with them however they wanted to. So, you know, you pick up ideas in other countries, and then you run with it. I mean, that at one time, that's how communism and fascism spread around the world, was through the universities and people traveling around and seeing how things were in other countries. And I think it was the same thing, except their people came here, were educated, maybe read about it for 2 seconds or saw it on a college campus, and then went back there. And I'm sure if you were coming to America to be educated as a scientist or engineer at a certain time period, you would have bumped into somebody from technocracy and been exposed to it. But I don't think there's a direct intentional infusion of like these people trying to push these ideas on them. I think the whole Nixon's visit was to create codependency between China and the U.S. to force China to to become a democracy.
Okay.
I think that was the intention of the visit.
I mean, I can understand that point that you explained on how the internal developments of processes in the Chinese society work, and that there's a major difference between the competitive model we have in the West and the communist model they have in China. But from and I'm not saying or thinking that they went there and said, look, this is the technocracy book, let's implement that over here. That's not what I thought. But doing research, I found out that, for example, Rockefeller Foundation, they set up the first school in China in 1917. And that then later on, if you look into the Yale archives, you know, they have an article on Mao Zedong and how Yale funded his first libraries and bookshops and made him the editor-in-chief of their student newspaper, which he used then, as per the quote from the Yale University, for thought reorientation. So obviously there was some support from the US, especially from the Yale University, as you can read from the Yale Daily News, and from the Rockefeller Foundation, who was open to basically like fund things in China or work together with China when it was not en vogue, let's say, for the rest of the country in the US to work and collaborate with China. That's why my hypothesis is that at a certain point, and Kissinger was very close to these like banking circles, that they in the end went there, not selling the technocracy book, but maybe influencing the way that the industry has been set up there. And also there are, as per newspaper articles from the US, billions of funding that went over there in an illegal way, setting up infrastructure and so on. So I do think from the research that I did, there is not necessarily a process to build up the technocracy as per Howard Scott's handbook, but that some circles in the US had an interest of building up China, maybe for like industrial a cooperation, just to make more money, because it's a huge market and they wanted to access the market. But I'm not quite sure on if they had the intention to make that a democracy. For me, it looks more as though if they wanted to open the market to actually make more money, and also look how that whole digitalization thing and a technocratic approach might work in a very isolated society.
I think they were trying to spread capitalist ideas to a country that was already more of a technocracy because of the Soviet system. The Soviet system is at that time was a centralized planned system. The reforms they did later, they decentralized, but at that time they were a centralized system. So they were by default already had technocratic tendencies from being a Soviet republic. So I don't think those ideas. I think those ideas were already there. I don't think they were being introduced. If you talk about the origins of technocracy back in the 1920s, there was a conference between technocrats and Soviets sharing ideas about central planning. And so I mean,
but may I interrupt? Oh, I didn't know about that conference. Where did that happen? It's new to me.
Patrick Wood even mentions it in his great research that he does. But that is something that happened. And that's something that happened a long time ago. I can find the details and email you it later.
I thought you might know it by heart.
No, not at the top of my head. Okay. I'm bad with names and dates.
No problem.
But no, but that did happen at one time, but it was in the infancy. And then if I remember right, I think the guy even got killed off by Stalin later, because he was a competitor. You know, he was seen as a competitor. So, you know, at one time there was some, you know, exchange of ideas between those two groups of people when both groups were in their infancy, though. Like communism was not dominating Russia, and technocracy was not even a group yet in America. It was the Technocratic Alliance that came first.
Technical Alliance,
yeah, and they were doing their studies and everything. So there was an exchange of ideas there, and I think they share ideas on a centrally planned economy, but then they both have very different views on how that's implemented, and that's where they divert, and that's why they didn't stay together and become one union. That's why they split ways and said, you know, I like your ideas, but we can't get over our differences, so we're going to part ways. And but then I think that's where China gets a lot of these technocratic tendencies is from this older form of communism that they followed in their origin, and they stuck with it way longer than even the Russians did. And when they saw the Russians failing, they still stuck with it a little longer before they go, you know what, I think we need to listen to Henry Kissinger and Nixon and incorporate some capitalist ideas into our system. Otherwise, we're just going to die like the Russians did. And I think that's was the whole point of that exchange, was to infuse capitalist ideas into China, not technocratic ones. I've seen a lot of Patrick Wood stuff in the Trilateral Commission and how he has these theories that these guys went over there trying to put these technocracy ideas in there. I feel like Patrick Wood had a great series of books about the Trilateral Commission that he was pushing. And when it wouldn't sell, he infused it with technocracy as a new buzzword. And that helped revitalize his ideas and sell it to a new generation. When you look at Patrick Wood's material, there's a big disconnect and a big break between the technocracy and his Trilateral Commission theory, okay? And I think they're two separate things that he fused together to sell books, because there's no clear lineage from one group to the other. And that's where I feel like his ideas really fall apart. Like, there is a real thing called technocracy. There is a real group of people, but there was no direct contact between all these other people that he talks about.
Yeah, that's true. I did my research because I also looked into obviously the Trilateral Commission and other organizations and how they influence geopolitics over time. But there is no actual documented link between that organization or the Council on Foreign Relations or other organizations that you would find or have documented an actual paper proving that. So it might be that, as you said, it's just maybe that they had an idea of opening the market, and since China already was influenced by a centralized, approach from a communist background, that ended up being as you said, the evil form of technocracy, because they have this centralized communism already there. And then if you put in additional money and technology and know-how from like high-tech country USA, and opening that market, that might be the model that resulted and that we see today. That is a valid idea. And also, just to mention, I did send a note to Mr. Wood and asked him if he would be willing to join the conversation. Didn't get, and I did send him our final video and the interview, and I sent a press request if he would be willing to join, and I didn't get a reply either.
Yeah, I do want to bring up a very simple thing. Everybody probably already knows this, but all of the technocracy and those things came about because they saw that the technology was really going to change the whole social structure, and it was going to be able to do the work of people and all this. And so how best to handle this where it has the least negative effect on society and the environment. That was what the the nutshell, the whole crux of technocracy was. How do we adjust to this big change that's going to keep snowballing, keep growing, and how can we best handle it? And so, and then it just kind of goes from there. But that's the basic. It's like, okay, we see this is going to happen. We're trying to be proactive about it rather than react to what is happening. Oh no, we're losing our jobs. Well, yeah, you knew we were going to lose those jobs because we have the technology now that can do them and better than people. So,
Justin, you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, there's a great TV show about what Charmie's talking about. It's called Continuum. And in Continuum, you have this time traveling police officer, and she's from the future. And there's these emerging technologies that are occurring, and how those emerging technologies determine whether the future is a dystopia or a utopia. And that's kind of what we face today. Is you have some technology that could be awesome, like tracking a person, right? Now that could be used to be intrude on their privacy, or it could be used to locate somebody who's lost in the woods. So it's a double-edged sword, and it's all about who is wielding that sword on what our society becomes. And what we're seeing the same tools being used by China, and they seem to, have a tendency to use them for intrusive things. And we're in a democratic world, we tend to put regulations on it saying, you only can use this for this.
Yeah, that's true. And that actually is a good link or a bridge to the questions that we to the two main questions that we got as a response to our first episode or conversation. One was about privacy and data privacy, and how would you position yourself, or how would you answer people that basically say, in such a world, there is full transparency. I'm not able to have a private life anymore because everything is tracked, everything is accessible. And obviously, as a normal person, I cannot control who sees my smartphone data, or who can in the background access my email account or see my financial details. So in a fully technocratic system, if we're all 20 years ahead from now, then everything is fully digitalized, and digitized. What do you tell these people who are afraid of, full transparency and the state or that circle that runs the show having access to all that information and basically seeing everything you do?
I think there's two parts to that. I think the first part is we have to define what's your private thoughts. If a government agency is intruding on your privacy and they see some of your private thoughts, when is it your private thoughts and when is it a plot to overthrow the government? Where is that divide? Where do you define that line of this is your private thoughts? I'm just blowing off some steam, or I'm just fantasizing. It doesn't mean anything. We have to define that, And
wouldn't it? Sorry for interruption. Wouldn't it be that the thoughts are free, and that only when you get to action and you do something criminal, you get fined or you go to jail? Because as long as you think what you want to think, that's fine. It doesn't get to an action.
Well, he's talking about writing down a blog or something.
Yeah.
Where it's your thoughts, but there still should be private, right?
Yeah, right now we've had kids get arrested for blogging on or posting on their social media that they're mad at so-and-so and they're going to go mess them up. Does that constitute a crime, or do we have to wait till the kid actually tries to do something? Another incident is we have people that have gotten arrested because they were buying body armor and buying guns and buying ammunition and stockpiling them and talking about how they were going to make people pay. Is that a good time to move in, or do you still wait even longer for them to actually do something? We have to have a big group conversation about where that line is. At what point do we need to take action, and at what point do you need to be like, Johnny's just blowing off some steam, and leave him alone?
And that's the predictive crime thing that they do in a few cities in the US already, where they have these predictive crime programs, and then they actually show up at people's houses before they do something. But that's that's a philosophic discussion. It's a really difficult topic also.
Yeah, and it relates to the red flag laws that we have now too, where somebody can say this person owns a bunch of guns, I'm worried they're going to shoot me up or something. And then you can call the police and have them come and take all the guns away. And then you have to go through a big legal process to get them back. So, you could consider that like a pre-crime, type of enforcement.
Charmie, do you want to add to that? Sorry.
Yeah, I just, and it would depend on who is in control of that. And again, it goes along with what Justin's saying, but who is reading or interpreting the data? Because if you're an emotional person, you get all upset about anything, then you're going to interpret the data one way. And if you have more of a scientific mind, you're like, okay, I can see that's not a pattern, that's escalating. And like Justin said, blowing off steam is one thing, but escalating the rhetoric that gets stronger and stronger and more violent, then that's another interpretation. So I really think it's who is in control of the interpretation.
So I mean, back to the initial question that was about data privacy. What's your take then, Charmie? So would I have to be open to have all my data accessed, or is it somebody, is it the point where a machine does that, and artificial intelligence, and only at one point where it shows that like dangerous pattern, somebody, an actual human being, maybe has access to the data or something?
Well, the artificial, okay, I'm going to take that in two parts. Artificial intelligence is only as good as the coding and who codes it and how it's coded. Yes. So that's open to interpretation too. But as far as the data, we already know anything we put on our cell phones is public. You can choose not to put it down. I do have a journal. I don't have a blog, but I have a journal, and I write it on paper in my house. And I can say whatever the heck I want. Nobody gets it. You can choose to have privacy. You can. You don't have to put it in the digital world. If you put it in the digital world, you have to have the expectation that at some point, either because you did something wrong, somebody's going through your computer or what, then it's public. Then it's, then it's open to interpretation. That's why I write on paper and pen, because I don't want everything I'm thinking or whatever to be public.
Yeah, that's true. You can send letters, but they have also changed the law for post offices or post for mailings over here, so they can open mail much easier than they did like 20 years ago. So the state comes in even there. Yeah, in Europe, in a lot of countries, they have made the laws easier to open your mail.
So you're just writing to a friend or a extramarital lover, and they can open your. Oh, great.
If your social media profile tells you are maybe a subversive or so for a person, and they have reasons, and the law is on their side to open your actual physical mail. Yeah.
My friend's trying to get a hold of. Hold on one second. I'm going to mute me.
Yeah. But I can ask Justin a question in the meantime. As you touched on guns before, in a technocracy, or what is the position of like the Technocracy Inc. towards gun laws? Because that's a big discussion in the US as well. Would there be a gun law as you have it? It's a Second Amendment, right?
I'm going to have to interrupt because I have to go. I have to go check out what's going on with my dog. He fell over. So
okay, then anyway. Just leave the meeting, and if you can come back, then join back in with the same link, and if not, then we'll reach out.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll do a tete-a-tete over here, you and I. Yeah, that's a good question, actually, as far as the gun laws are concerned. What's the position there with that Second Amendment thing? Would that still be...
So technocracy is supposed to be a system, so that's more of a social valuation, so that would be separate, and that would be unique to each area. But I would say that if you were doing a technocracy in America, gun ownership is a tradition, and freedom of speech is a tradition here. So those things should go along with the technocracy that would be implemented here. Where in another country, maybe where gun ownership is not a tradition, that might not be something that goes along with the technocracy. And I think like in Europe, you have different traditions on freedom of speech that are very different than America. There's stuff that people do in Europe that in America, people would flip out and burn a flag. It's very different traditions of freedom of speech.
Yeah, the other way around too. There's stuff that is allowed in the US that is people go crazy over here. If you go to a flea market and you see, you know, like from the Second World War, you see those uniforms and stuff. That's all obviously all forbidden over here, at least in Germany.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about because I buy games and some of the stuff is made in Europe, but it's made for a European market, so they censor the symbology of it because it violates the laws of Germany.
No, yeah, that's true. Yeah. And then also as we I think we got interrupted a little bit. I had a note down on and that is a good topic to come like from the data privacy aspect. So maybe even going back to the data privacy aspect for a second, because I think we didn't really answer the question maybe. So if a person lives in a technocracy the way you would, you know, ideally envision it, would there be the same kind of level of data privacy that we see today, or is it naturally less because there is a more there's more automation, you know, there's more centralized and maybe AI, you know, taking over things. So would there be less privacy than we have today in general? Is it necessary to have that, to have a running technocracy, I mean, up and running as it should be as per the like ideal concept?
I think a technocracy is ideally trying to fulfill the needs of the society. So if the society needs it, maybe it would have it. If it doesn't need it, wouldn't have it. Like if you look at the pre-9/11 world versus the post-9/11 world, the pre-9/11 world, we weren't worried about a lot of things when we got on an airplane. But then post-9/11, it's been over 20 years and we're still worrying about stuff to get on an airplane. And I think you would find the same debate. I think they would try to leave people be, but if people started blowing stuff up, then you would have to intrude on people's privacy. And then I know with the United States, I've read a lot about that and how like what the NSC, the CIA try to do with data management and data mining. And yeah, they try to rely on AI programs to sift through massive amounts of data, which is an almost impossible task, even with AI. So even then, they still have to target certain areas to sift through that data, and then that goes to a reviewer, and they look at it again. So that is probably how it would work, just from a logistics standpoint, right, for efficiency. But whether or not that would be needed would be determined by the society. If you have a harmonious society, there's a lot of need for it. And we have a lot of countries in this world where they don't worry about crime and terrorism like the United States does. The United States
there's a big difference between Switzerland, where I live, and the bigger inner city here, than if I walk through some areas of New York City, where I have a very different approach to, you know, going around at night. So yeah, that's right. Prerequisites depend. Basically, the answer is that depending on the prerequisites, it's basically as if you look at the world today. If the prerequisites are bad, you have to increase security. If it's a more harmonic society, you wouldn't need to do that.
Like if you had like a place like Hawaii, like a technocracy in Hawaii, right? You probably don't have any problems in Hawaii, right? But if a problem did come, it would probably come from the outside. So you might concentrate your surveillance on people that are not from the island coming in. So, you know, you'd be intelligent about it. You wouldn't just have a police state where you surveil everybody, because that just doesn't make sense. I mean, we've looked at spending in China, and China spends more on internal policing than it does on its military. And that's just insane. They spend more time, effort, and energy controlling their people than they do on their adversaries in the rest of the world. That's just crazy. Even America isn't that bad.
No, I mean, America has the biggest defense or the military budget in the world, obviously, but also not the best history in tracking own people with all that with the data, Snowden data leaks and whatnot. So all these prison programs and so Facebook and whatnot. What was it? Cambridge Analytica. There was a lot of stuff going on as well. That is I think that's what the next topic is. That's what a lot of people asked, because you last time, when I asked, what is a security barrier to not have greed take over as in capitalism? Because if people, have these circles They are in the council in a region, and they are the ones responsible for steering, deciding up on, let's say, the technocracy in their region, the processes and so on. And you said last time, yeah, there needs to be moral, like a moral code that people adhere to. And then we basically discussed, yeah, but that's what we should do in capitalism today as well, and it's not working. So, and a lot of people obviously had the same comment below the video. Isn't that naive? That was the question. Isn't it naive to think that if you change the model, that the behavior changes? Or would there be anything else in that model that enables people to be more moral or to adhere to moral concepts that we don't adhere to today in capitalism?
So the big argument of technocracy or the Venus Project or the Zeitgeist movement, where they talk about post-scarcity, right? Creating a post-scarcity society. The big idea is that if you eliminate need and panic and scarcity, that human beings should level out and stop trying to do bad things to each other. So if you have a house and you have food and you have medicine and you get a vacation and you have some disposable income and you had a job that wasn't that bad, would you be less willing to participate in illegal activity? That's the argument. And like where I work, we have a lot of problems with homeless people, and those homeless people have drug problems and mental health problems and employment problems. And because of that, they commit crimes. If and then we're trying right now, they're trying to put them in housing, and they're trying to give them food and some income. But they're still not really addressing like their mental health and their drug issues, which are the bigger issues. So if you had like any society that was healthy and took care of people's issues, it should be more functional and have less dysfunction. That's the argument of technocracy, is that by planning things well, people's needs will be met and you'll have less social dysfunction. And a good technocracy should be constantly surveying its citizens and asking them, what do you need? What do you want? So those things are met. And everybody might not have their dream job, but there should be enough maneuverability that you can, move into a different job if you weren't happy with the job you had.
Okay. One question also that came about and that I actually found funny over the past few days is if there's some kind of central like AI, artificial intelligence, like any program, running the show or calculating things. How would we ensure that it's a neutral thing? Because now people did some testing on that ChatGPT, if you saw that. And they asked and they asked it, can you write a poem about Donald Trump, a nice little poem? And the chat answered, no, I can't. And then the same question on Biden, and it wrote a nice little poem. So it seems to be kind of biased towards the Democrats. So how do we ensure that technology stays neutral and is actually working to the good of everyone instead of that party that is programming it?
Well, I think it's checks and balances like you have in any government. So like in some sci-fi genres, they've talked about having AI as part of the government. And it would basically kind of like, in America, we have, the president, the Senate, and the Congress, right? And that's kind of like the little decision triangle, right? So you would add to that decision triangle and maybe an AI. You would consult with the AI at one step, but the other parties have the power to overpower the AI if they think it's wrong. But the AI would be giving its input in those kind of schemes. Okay. But in every one of those schemes, you always have people able to override the AI if they think it's making a bad decision.
Okay, that's good because it gets scary at some point. In China, they have released the first AI prosecutor last year, where people actually the judge is not the prosecutor, sorry, the judge is a machine. So you go to the courtroom and there's a machine that has all the data on your behavior, crime, social media records, whatnot, and you can speak to that machine as a human being. You speak to it, and then that machine takes a decision, and it's binding. And if that machine tells you go to jail, you go to jail, which is kind of a scary thing. If that's the only decision body you have in front of you, there's no negotiating or maybe reading mimics or.
Well, it's not even how we make a judge. A judge is made by having them first serve as a lawyer for years before they're allowed to be a judge. So, I mean, there's flawed in just making the program. You know, you would probably try to test that program, like maybe make the robot a defense lawyer and see how it does as a defense lawyer. And if it's horrible as a defense lawyer, then you probably don't want to move any further. And you would probably want another human next to it while it's developing, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because I think the Chat GPT also passed some university exams for being a lawyer in the US recently, answered the questions.
Yeah, and I'm sure it could, but I think Elon Musk talks about how AI and computer stuff should be used as an enhancement to humans. I mean, we're already cybernetically enhanced right now with our phones. True. And it's just we're at this point, we're trying to enhance that relationship so that I don't have to know everything. And I can just go to the computer and go, hey, how do I fix my car? And the computer goes, oh, you do this. And, you know, and that should be more the interaction. It shouldn't be the computers telling me, dictating my life. I should be dictating to it. It should be my assistant, you know.
Yes, and not really working with a lot of people today, even because they get maneuvered around by their social media. And obviously we see people using Instagram a lot, they get depression. And I mean, we haven't been told how to use that as a productive tool. It's mostly for most people or a lot of people, it's just overwhelming as far as the information flood is concerned and stuff.
Yeah, and the way our brains work with watching the videos and the dopamine response we have is really fascinating, and we're not really talking about that too much, and we should be, because it's more of a weird drug addiction with the way it works on our brain than anything else. I have to tell my sons, like, you know, get off your computers, get off your phone, and go do something else. You know, that's not good for you.
That's why the big social media moguls, Sean Parker also, don't have they don't allow their kids to have cell phones or social media accounts, and they don't even have accounts themselves. So, I mean, it's addictive, and they knew that. I mean, they even said it in press conferences that they knew, and they did it anyway. That's
well, yeah. They've said that they've done research to find what the peak amount of minutes to expose you to get the right response, and they have like a whole series of video games now, where the video games are made to be really stupid and easy because you get a better dopamine response. And so like now we're using psychological and physiological research to cater the games to give you better dopamine response.
Yeah.
So they're literally just doing what the cigarette companies and drug dealers have done for years, where they're trying to give you a better high, a more addictive high, but now through computers.
And that's, I think, what people are afraid of, you know, if everything around us gets even more, you know, like digital, and with all these fancy, you can actually, it's kind of a psychological warfare, you know, of like capitalism companies, whatever, the system against the Homo sapiens having to deal with that. And obviously we are not capable to some extent. So that is what people are most afraid of, as you can see from the comments below the video, that there is some fear around being like victim to technology, and obviously also that tendency of transhumanism that also Elon Musk you know, addresses every now and then, with being enhanced by computer chips and basically losing the species to a mixture of some cyborg thing that comes out of that development. Where's the barrier in a technocracy, you know, concept where you say, or is there any barrier, let's say, between the human being and technology, or is it kind of a fusion at some point as well, just as we see from like a transhumanist concept? What's your take on that one?
I think that's another social decision, and it depends on the group of people. I think you're going to have a group of transhumanism people that are going to embrace it and dive right into it. And then I think you're going to have other people that are going to say, no, we're not about that. And I think you're going to have different pockets of that developing all over the world, with different people embracing different things. And I feel like that's a big social experiment that we're all going to watch and see what happens to everybody as they, you know, follow different agendas. Like, oh, that didn't work out with that country, or oh, that didn't work out with that city. You know, that really backfired. Yeah. And we'll learn and grow from it. But I think it'll ultimately be positive. But I think there's definitely going to be growing pains in that evolution.
One thing that people, as I said in the beginning, acknowledge is that there is common ground. I mean, as we spoke last time, you also, and correct me if I'm wrong, you also had the feeling that the system today is kind of broken, that it's full of corruption, that we have some kind of like corporate, corporatism thing where companies dictate where we go, and strategic decisions are not really made by the representatives of the people, the politicians, because even I think Princeton University had a study in 2017 that said if they looked at the votes and what people voted for and what politics in Washington are actually doing, the correlation is zero, basically. That's what Princeton found out, which is a sad thing for a democracy. So I think we have some common ground in thinking that where we are right now, the status quo has to be changed. So maybe as we move towards the end of the hour that we wanted to spend talking, what would be from your point of view next steps to improve things? How would we change the world to be a better place? Because there is so much stuff that's broken right now and not functioning. What's the first steps that we do take, especially in terms of technology overwhelming us instead of serving us?
Well, I like to call it the corporate states of America. That's the real country's name. We're the corporate states of America.
Makes sense, though.
And as far as like the alternatives, I think in the birth of any nation is based on city-states, right? We're a collection of city-states, and each city has its own unique view, and then that infuses into the larger state that they occupy. But really, we're still a bunch of city-states. New York has a very different feel than Los Angeles. They're very different places, different systems. And I think what's going to happen is you're going to have new city-states or old city-states remaking themselves with different systems. And then people are going to look at that and see if it works or not. So I think every city that you have is a test bed for new systems and ideas. And hopefully we recognize the one that's working the best and we start to copy and imitate that one. Somebody needs to set an example, take the lead, and show us that there's a better way. And the only way you can really do that is by demonstrating it and by making it real. In America, we have very, very different cities. Every city is different. You go to Utah, it's way different than going to Las Vegas, So I think America is a great place for demonstrating that. Europe is too, and almost any country in the world. Everybody has different cultural ideas on how to fix problems, but we need to exchange ideas and see what works and doesn't work. We're not really talking to each other. We're just pointing fingers at each other.
Yeah, that's true. That's why I like talking to you. You might not convince me of your idea, and I'm not convincing you of my world vision, but that's not the idea of a conversation. The idea is to find the middle ground and share the habitat we have, and in a way that makes sense for everyone. And again, I do feel there's an additional common ground, because if we talk about improving our world around here in Europe or in the area I live, it's decentralization. So a lot of people talk about decentralized models. Be it as you said, like it could be a city that implements a alternative currency instead of using the euro. It could be that we get off the, let's say, smartphone grid that we have, and we implement different technology and use a different Wi-Fi network, than the others around do. And maybe if it's working better and people are more happy over here with that model that we are trying in a smaller community, that spreads to a broader audience, to a broader community. So again, I feel that's also what you just said. It's more like a decentralized approach. So implementing it in smaller units and then see if that grows to something good.
Yeah, the only thing I'm concerned with the decentralization, though, is the failure of us to work together on a larger scale to accomplish positive things. There's some challenges that we're going to face that we have to work together on a large scale. If you have an earthquake that hits a region, you have to come together and work for that goal. And that's an easy thing to decide on and agree on. But then when you have other things like regional wars, that's a harder thing to get people to come together and agree on. So the only thing that I'm worried about is with decentralization is that we don't help each other out enough. We still need to be able to come together and help each other for things we can agree on, and not to lose that when we're trying different ways.
Now, I can follow that thought to a certain extent. On the other hand, I do think that, we have globalization to a really big extent now. And we can see that a lot of countries, as you touched on last time, like Africa or regions in the world that I've been to as well, they suffer while we have a fantastic life out here in Europe. So globalization and running the show like from a central point of view, which seems to be if it's corporate America, running a lot of the show, it doesn't work either. So maybe if it's decentralized, there is no regional war, because if I have a small town, I'm not thinking about buying tanks and attacking my neighbor's town, usually. So if I have a problem with them, I just don't go there. So don't you think that decentralization maybe even overcomes the concept of war, because you're not fighting for a bigger region that you feel like you have to defend, and there's somebody else evil? Because usually people are not evil with each other.
I think globalization is kind of like a term like technocracy, where you can twist it to what you want it to mean. So like the way I agree we implement globalization right now is very manipulative and abusive, but we don't have to do it that way. And things about globalization don't make sense other than to exploit cheap labor. But we can have globalization where we're exchanging things that aren't unique, that are unique to certain areas, like certain minerals. Certain minerals can only be found in certain parts of the world. So you need those people to distribute and to trade around the world in that commodity, where other things like food, most places can make enough food to sustain their own population. Now, there are exceptions to that, like you might have a desert region, and that desert region can't make enough food, so they have to import a lot of food. But I think there needs to be some decentralization that makes sense for how can we be locally sustainable as much as possible, and then what can we not be locally sustainable, and we need to continue globalization for those things. And I think we'd have a higher level of efficiency, and that would have a positive impact on global warming and amongst other things. And I think a lot of conflict is always based around resource shortages. Like there's a book I read it's called Resource Wars, and this U.S. general traces most conflicts to shortages of resources that end up spiraling into social dysfunction and wars. Like some people that have pointed that the original civil war in Syria all started about shortages of water, with farmers protesting and writing graffiti, and then the government cracking down on that graffiti and those protesters, and then that sparking the whole civil war. But ultimately, it started with water and shortages of water with farmers. And I think that's how we still get wars, is we're not managing our resources properly. And that's kind of another thing that technocracy touches on, is managing things efficiently. And when we don't manage things efficiently, it turns into The Walking Dead, and we're shooting each other over peanut butter,
Yeah, hopefully not peanut butter. One thing I don't like about the US is peanut butter. We have this different stuff over here. It's too sweet. So, but yeah, I get the point. Yeah, I get the point, and it makes sense from that point of view. And then since we are kind of running out of time now, one last question that people were really concerned about is obviously money. So if there is no money in that system, but only those certificates, then they still, as I have a natural feeling of also associating it with like a socialist communist approach. If I don't have money and can go and buy whatever I want, so that made people feel bad somehow, because we see that in Germany just now they're discussing this CO2 tracking thing, which is kind of the core idea, is tracking your energy consumption, and people are afraid that they have to stay at home with their car because they've used their budget. So what do you tell those people who are really afraid of that?
It would still feel like money. That's the biggest thing. It would still feel like money. Your allotment would probably be up. You would actually probably have way more than you had before. Now, the other weird thing about it is it's supposed to expire at the end of the month.
Yeah, so but that's something that people are really afraid of, that they have some savings and by end of the month it's zeroed out. But
you immediately get the same amount the next month. So it's so people, the reason they make it expire at the end of the month is so you don't get hoarding. Like in capitalism, you get hoarding of wealth. And that's what they're trying to avoid, is the hoarding of wealth.
That's a really good point. And I think a good a point to basically stop for today. Also, I see that somebody is coming in and needs you, maybe.
Yeah.
So appreciate you talking. I find it fascinating. You know, it's really what you just said. It's exchanging ideas and having an open conversation. And I hope that at some point I will be in touch. I will follow up. And again, there's a lot of common ground, actually, if you talk to other people about a very different concept, which also made me think after our first conversation of what I wrote and what my article was about and how I look at things. And that from that common ground, you could move to a consensus at some point, you know, if you talk long enough. That's what people should do, talking to each other, whether you are from the left, the right, from up or down, or wherever you come from. It's basically talking to each other makes things much better.
Yeah.
So appreciate you taking the time. Then thanks for watching, everyone, and see you maybe a third time at some point.
Okay.
Okay, I'll stop recording maybe in a second.